Hi friends, welcome back to a new video. If you're new here, my name is Madeline and I work as a quality assurance analyst for a software company. Basically, I test software. Today's video is about skills that I have learned and developed as a software quality assurance analyst and skills that I feel like I use every day. The goal of these QA videos for me is just to help people who are looking into this job, people who are maybe hearing about QA for the first time, or they're interviewing for this kind of position. I think it's a great job. It's a great way to work in tech without being like a developer or knowing how to write code, depending on the type of QA you are. I also feel like there's not a ton of content out there about it. It's kind of a newer job, I guess, but I think it's a growing industry. So this is just to kind of share my perspective, hopefully give some information. As always, little disclaimer, this is just based on my experience. I've only worked as a QA at one company. Been there for about 2.5 years now, but I definitely don't know everything. There's more things I don't know than I do know, but happy to share my experience. Also, I work as a manual QA primarily. We are working on automating more things, but that's a newer part of my job. Most of my testing is manual. The first skill that is so important that I use every single day is time management. As a QA, you are most likely working on multiple things at once. For example, for me, I'm usually working on at least like 3 or 4 issues at a time. I'm also working on upkeep of our test repository. Sometimes I'm developing training for other parts of my team. We also have automated tests that we work on weekly, plus creating project documentation and just helpful documentation for other parts of the system. There's a lot to get done and some of it is more urgent than others. So I always start every single day by making my to-do list for the day. I will list out my meetings and what time they are at. I will make a list of everything I want to do, and then I look at that and try to prioritize it. What are the most pressing issues, which is usually what is time sensitive. Some deadlines are not set by me. We have our weekly release deadlines, so I know if I'm testing this issue and it's installed to a testing environment, it needs to be ready to go out by a certain date. For me, that's Tuesdays. So that deadline is set. I'm not changing that. So anything that is dependent on that deadline is going to kind of take priority depending on where we are. If it's a Thursday, then obviously I have all the way until Tuesday. But if it's a Monday or it's Tuesday, then those issues that are going to be in that weekly release are going to be pretty high priority. Prioritizing my list helps me still make time for the less urgent work that is still important to get done. It just doesn't have as hard of a deadline. So something like the test repository upkeep and organization, that's just an ongoing thing. Obviously there's no deadline where it's just going to be done because we're going to continue creating tests and adding to it. But since I have my tasks prioritized and I take care of the most urgent things in the beginning of the day, I can usually make sure I have time for those other less urgent things at the end of the day. No day is perfect and my days are not the same. Some day might have a lot more meetings, so I might only get to focus on the more urgent things after that. But I always give myself at least 5 minutes in the morning. Even if I know in my head what I'm going to work on first, I still make myself take inventory, write a to-do list, prioritize it. At least for me, most of my day, what I work on when is kind of up to me. Like I said, you have those deadlines that your whole team has, but whether I'm going to work on issue 1 or issue 2, how long I'm going to spend on those, that's kind of up to me. I did be flexible even with my daily plan because things can come up. My team lead can tell me, hey, this issue just was created. It's really high priority. Can you work on this today? And I'm going to switch gears, recalibrate my to-do list and focus on that. That actually happened today. The next skill that has definitely been strengthened by working in QA for me is critical thinking. Maybe more accurate to say comprehensive and logical thinking. Not saying that I am always like this, but I mean, especially at work, I try to be as thorough and critical as I can. QA is a job that is very focused on small details because, at least in my experience, the issues I'm testing are these small code changes. We're just changing one thing at a time, bit by bit. In my experience, I'm the person who's supposed to focus on the little details, if there's supposed to be a period there, is there a period there? Does the button look exactly like it should? That is what you're checking for as QA, but then you also need to keep a bigger picture perspective of the project as a whole. All those little details add up to the larger user experience. It's a bit of a give and take, but I want to think critically about the small details, but then how those play into the bigger picture. Does the small detail make sense for the user? Does it also make sense for the project at the end? Could this cause problems down the line with something else? And thinking like that just comes with time and experience, especially with whatever application or software you're testing. Like, you'll get to know it so well. You'll start to find things that are more likely to break or things that are connected. For me, it's definitely been a growing process because in my normal life, if something is broken or just odd or like not a great user experience, I'm very quick to just accept it and be like, oh, this is just how it is. But as QA, you're the person who's supposed to ask, like, is this how we want it? It's kind of hard to fully explain, but I feel like that all falls under critical thinking, being observant, which I'm not super observant, so that's a skill I've had to learn. The next skill that I use hopefully every single day, or I try to, is logical and clear writing. When you're writing tests, it's not like you're writing an essay or you're writing a story. Your writing doesn't have to be like beautiful and whatever, but it does need to be clear and logical. It needs to make sense, not just to you, but also to the developers, to anyone else who might reuse whatever test you've created, to someone an auditor who might be reading through your test. Trick of being a QA is that sometimes you're testing very like complex processes. You have to learn how to break that down into simple test cases that are clear. I think one way I try to do this, if it is like a complex issue where there's just like a lot of moving parts, maybe a lot of things interacting, I will just literally list out every single variable and try to just do almost like if-then statements. If this is true and this is true, then this should happen. If this is true and this is false, then this should happen. If this is false and this is true, kind of sometimes it helps me to see every single interaction and work through the flow that way, which is just like very basic testing. If you've done this for a while or you have like certifications and everything, you're probably like, yeah, duh. But I started out with no experience, and this is just something I kind of learned as I've been in it. Break it down as simple as possible, list out every single scenario you can think of. Yeah, logical and clear writing, especially about technical processes, can be a challenge if you don't come from a software background. You can do it, you can get there. You really got to slow down, break it down piece by piece. And just those very rudimentary, if this happens, this should happen. If this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this should happen. They get complicated, but those help me. This next one goes kind of right along with that, and that is the skill of organization. This can be in the form of note-taking, documentation, your mental organization, but I would say don't just keep it all in your head. Write it down either on paper or some type of note-taking application. Like I said earlier, you're probably working on multiple things at a time. For me, I have a chart of all of the issues I'm currently working on. I have a section for defects or bugs that I've found. I have a section for defects or bugs that are fixed, which I just move it over to that section and use like the strike through. And then I have a section for notes where I put like what environment it's on, if there's any special testing considerations I need, anything I need to remember, I put it in that little notes section. If I need to ask the product manager something, I have it all there in one table. We do use an actual software to like track defects and everything, so it's kind of double, but this is just for me, so I don't like lose it in that software. I don't know. I like to have my own little version to keep track. I've learned to not just trust that I'll remember something, especially because once I leave work, I don't usually think about work until I go back the next day. So it's super nice to walk in and already have notes of where I left off on anything, especially over the weekend. I get like a weekend refresh in my brain and all of it's gone. So having the notes reminds me where I was, but keeping that organized is so important, because if you just have notes on paper everywhere, that doesn't work for me. Maybe it works for some people. All of our brains are different. Find a system that works for you. Another way organization comes into play with QA is in how you organize the knowledge you gain about whatever it is you're developing to share with the rest of your team, app support, maybe the end users. It could really depend on your situation. QA has like a very intimate knowledge of what went into creating that page, the ins and outs of it, how to use it, how not to use it. So being able to use your logical writing and organize that knowledge in a way that it makes it shareable and useful to those other groups is a huge skill. Okay, I feel like I talk about this one all the time, but the next one is communication. It's just so important. If you work in a team and if you are QA, then that means you at least work with the developer. You're at least testing someone's code. Communication can facilitate a process and make it run smoothly, or it can cause like a breakdown and just make things slow down. I always say err on the side of over communicating. Use that logical writing, use that organization, give as much information as possible. Usually when you're asking a question, like if I'm asking a question to my devs, I want to give as much information as possible. I don't want them to have to come back and ask me like 1, 2, 3, 4 questions before they can even start looking into it because I didn't give them complete information. That's gonna happen sometimes. It's okay, but giving more information is better than not enough. To a point, I guess like you could just go off and have a lot of not useful information. But you'll hone that skill. You'll figure out what is the useful information in your specific job. So that's one part of communication, but I think also communicating from a place of best intent and always approaching a situation, like giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. Assuming that everyone has good intentions, I think makes for a much more enjoyable work environment. Appreciating the role and the work that everyone is doing and letting them know that they're appreciated makes a huge difference. Okay, this last one might be the biggest one, or it's a skill that I don't feel like I had before working in QA, and now I feel like I do. I feel like it's just like second nature to me now, and that is learning how to troubleshoot something. Naturally, if something is just like wrong or broken, I am so quick to just accept it and move on with my life. But as QA, it is so important that you are able to notice something is wrong and then go back and figure out where the breakdown is. For me, I don't know any coding languages, so I'm not going to be able to go in there and look in the actual code, but I need to be able to go back, like retrace my steps and give like recreation steps. Say I clicked on a button and I got the wrong pop-up or something. I don't want to just immediately go tell the devs this pop-up was wrong. I want to be able to know in what scenarios it was wrong. Are there any scenarios where it's correct? So if that happens while I'm testing, first I'm going to go back, redo it, make sure it wasn't some fluke error thing. If it does happen again, then I'm going to change one of the variables, those variables that we mentioned earlier for the logical and clear writing. Change one of the variables that I'm testing, see if it still happens. Maybe I change one thing and then it works correctly, so that I know in this scenario, it reacts this way. In this scenario, it reacts this way. Not to say that it's always possible to narrow it down so nicely and neatly. Code can do crazy things, and things you wouldn't think touch or interact will, and sometimes like I truly won't know why something is happening, but I'm still going to get as much information as I can. So when you do this, you kind of end up with like a mental checklist of things you need to check off, pieces of information. In those times where like you can't find a whole lot of information, it is at least helpful to know that it's doing this in every scenario. Trying out as many combinations of those variables to troubleshoot it is still really helpful. One tip I do have for troubleshooting is take screenshots as you're troubleshooting. I know so many times I've run into some kind of defect and then not been able to recreate it, or sometimes I'll get really into like troubleshooting, looking into something, and I'll forget which scenarios I've already tried or which ones it was broken on, which ones it was working on. So I've gotten a lot better at just like always taking the screenshots so that I can at least go back and remind myself of what I've already tried, because like you can kind of get yourself going in circles if you don't keep track. Definitely recommend that. Take a screenshot or a note or a video, something to remind yourself of what you've already checked. All right guys, that's gonna be today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you are QA, you have any experience or you have any skills to add to this list, comment them down below, or any questions, let me know. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.